I'm Carrie McDonald, and this is the Liberated Podcast. I'm so excited to talk with our guest today, Vijay Shah, who is the founder of the Humanist Academy, an Acton Academy affiliate in Irving, Texas, that I had the opportunity to visit recently when I was exploring microschools and other innovative learning models in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area. And Acton Academy, for those of you who have listened to this podcast or are familiar with innovative learning models, is a fast-growing microschool network that was founded back in 2009 by Laura and Jeff Sandifer in Austin, Texas. Laura Sandifer wrote the wonderful book, Courage to Grow, that details the Acton model and the origin story and really emphasizes learner-driven education, or the hero's journey that each young person in an Acton school will embark upon to really discover their true passions and gifts and genius. Wonderful to have this conversation today. Vijay Shah, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you again.
Thanks for being here. You know, I want to get into what the Humanist Academy looks like and why you decided to create it, but let's start with your backstory. You were a public school teacher in the Chicago public schools for a while, kind of in that conventional system. Tell us a little bit about why you went into teaching in the first place and what that experience was like in the public schools there.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. For a lot of people my age who were born with immigrant parents from India, the dream generally is like the goal is like, okay, my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. And I grew up with that in my mind. Somebody would get hurt and I'd be like, oh, I got it. I'm, first aid and everything. And then as I really started thinking deeper about like what I wanted to do for myself independently, um, and then I job shadowed a doctor and I was like, this isn't really jiving with what I want to be. And I remember being part of like these youth discussion groups, part of a spiritual movement that I'm a part of. And then uh, really just thinking for myself, sitting in a classroom with a history class, and we're having a debate. And I was like, this is fun. I love this. I want to do something like this. I want to work with youth. And I remember my parents initially didn't take it very well. They were pretty upset. And then um, a couple times later, I tried again to kind of talk to him about it. And my mom was like, okay, it's fine. Like, just be a pharmacist like your dad. Um, and that was a pretty funny story. But yeah, I've always just dreamed of being in a classroom and working with young people and challenging them to think. And so I went that route. I taught history and math in high school. Then I taught language at Loyola University as an adjunct. And then should I go into like the
Yeah, so Vijay, maybe we could move at this point to what happened when you left the Chicago area for the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. You had family members that were there, you have a faith community there, and it was through that process of moving and connecting with your faith community and already thinking about other ways of teaching and learning, more self-directed learning models outside of the conventional system, that you were introduced for the first time to the idea of Acton Academy. Maybe you can share more about that experience.
I got a call from a friend, and he said, hey, he's a really prominent pediatrician in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And he said, hey, you just moved here, and you know, um, I don't know if you've heard about Acton, but it seems like a really cool program. So you should just check it out. And that was it. He just kind of left me a voicemail. He said, there's a 12-minute or 15-minute video on disruptive education. So I remember watching that video and being like blown away, like, oh, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And I think, we all have these moments in our lives where it just seems like you've been searching for something your whole life, and then it just, bam, it just hits. And so that was, at least, for my professional side and what I want to do in terms of the work with children and youth and education, this was it for me. So
Ah, it's so great. And this was still the early days of Acton. The network was starting to expand. But when you launched the Humanist Academy, you were still one of the first, really. Now there are roughly 300 Acton affiliates around the world, most in the US and more than 30 states. But you were really one of the original Actons. So how did that process go from you discovering the Acton model to then actually opening your school?
I gotta step back and pause for a sec because like I think of the originals, like the learners, they call them the OGs or whatever. I think of them obviously Jeff and Laura, are at the top, but then there's Juan in Guatemala who uh it's just amazing. He was the first one to say, "Hey Jeff, we want to start this in Guatemala." And I think they had the first graduate there. There's Danny in California, who lived in Austin. She's a fellow University of Chicago alum too, as well. So we connect with that. And then she started the second one in America in California. Um, there were about seven, in operation at that time. Mike in Houston, and these are people that I've learned so much from. Matt Clayton was at working at Acton, and then he went out and started Slope in Utah, and just yeah, really amazing people. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but I had incredible mentors that I feel like were the originals, and I'm just trying to keep up and do the best I can. But it was really fun because they had enough. I think your question was like, what was it like in the beginning in terms of starting this? Like yeah, can you?
Yeah. So what happened from you discovering Acton, watching that brief video that's on the Acton Academy website, saying this is it, to then opening the doors of the Humanist Academy?
Wow. So to be honest, it still feels like a dream. Like I didn't know anybody. The people that I knew in Dallas are part of like our spiritual group. And so I had to really draw lines personally because I never wanted to use the movement, the person, in terms of a spiritual leader who's everything to me. I didn't want to use that for a personal endeavor and mix the two. So I had to be really, really careful not to ever um, reach out to people and say, the people that I knew through let's say through your church, you don't want to go there and start doing, business or whatever with them. Like such a pure environment. It's for something deeper. So I honestly was not sure how it was going to work. We put some blasts on like nextdoor.com and Facebook. Like we just, put some things out, and then all of a sudden people started reaching out to us. um, I remember a call with one of our founding families where uh, he posted like, "Oh, I'm interested if you give me a call," and then we were talking, and he was like, "Oh, who am I speaking with?" And I was like, "Oh, my name's Vijay," and he's like, "Oh yeah, I noticed that there's a lady named Deepa that spoke really highly of you." And I was like, "Oh yeah, just to be honest, that's my wife. You'll probably meet her at some point." Um, and then I made it a point to really like do home visits. And that's something even with my faith, I feel like we try to visit people and just build a human connection. And so um, I was like, if you have 10 minutes, I'm coming over and we're going to talk because this is so powerful. It's worth thinking about for your children if you're receptive to it. And we ended up starting with 12 families that first year in a red brick house on Rodeo and Valley Ranch. Uh, and then from that we went to 27, 28 the next year, to 42, to 50 something. We stayed at 55 one year, like when COVID first hit, and then we went to like 70 something, and then 85 now. And so
Mm.
it really is just kind of organically grown. And I have very little credit to take, and all the gratefulness and just blessings from the people and the higher power to think of.
So you officially launched in 2016. if I recall, and
Yes.
you had the 12 families. Now you're at over 85 students. Tell us what the composition is of the students. What are they like? What are the different levels? For someone who's not familiar with Acton, how do you kind of segment the student groups and what are they working
Yeah.
on?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with Montessori, for people who aren't, something really profound and powerful about an active environment is the mixed age studio. We try to change the lingo, right? We don't call them classrooms, we call them studios. It's all intentional. When you're trying to provide a paradigm shift in education, you have to stop using the same language, I believe, and start thinking differently. And it starts with language. So we have multi-age studios. We have a Montessori-based Spark studio. The learners are between 3 and 6 or 3 and 7. And then we have an elementary studio, and the learners are between 7 and 11 or so, like grade equivalent, like second to fifth grade. We try as much as possible not to put them in a box of a grade, and limit, where they're at, or make them feel like, oh, I'm behind because I'm not at par with everybody else at this certain age, which is a social phenomenon of conventional education, which is almost, absurd. And then, uh, yeah, so we have a Spark studio that's Montessori based. And then we have an elementary studio, and then around sixth grade equivalency. Some of them get in there earlier, based on their progress, and some of them get in there later. Sixth to eighth grade, we have our middle school, and then we have a high school, which we call a launch pad, because we're getting ready to launch them into the real world. And we have about 20 to 30 in Spark middle school, ES in middle school. Our ES is like the fullest, and we're going to probably split that into two next year, a lower L and an upper L. And then our high school has 7 warriors right now. Our warriors are our mascot. They did a mascot project their first year, and they were like, warriors are loyal and protective and trustworthy. And so then they did a whole thing. It was like warriors versus heroes, and then everybody voted on the warriors. I think it had to do with the Golden State Warriors being really good at that time. But anyway, so yeah, I guess that's the kind of
Yeah.
break.
Yeah. So you mentioned this paradigm shift in education, and Acton really embraces this idea of learner driven education. There are adults there to kind of help with Socratic discussions and hold the space for learning, but it's really all driven by the learners, the heroes in the Acton vernacular. And really, by the time the students are in the middle school ages, they're running the studio. I mean, when I visited the day that I was there, the middle school age cohort they were running the program, and certainly the launch pad, the high school age, were doing that too. How does that happen, BJ?
That's a great question. So the day you came was a no guide day. So we have 2 days where we don't have a guide. And I do have to give credit to Miss Burvey I was telling you about earlier. She's done an amazing job just equipping them. So setting things up. And this all also is a credit to Acton and the resources and the way Jeff and Laura have set things up. You spend a lot of time thinking about culture. And you think of the best organizations right now in the world, right? And there's a culture to them, and there's a lot of intentionality behind the environment, the atmosphere, the relationships. There's a really cool book that we use a lot, we refer to, called Tribal Leadership by Dave Logan. Um, and it's that's another topic for another day, but we're hoping, level 1 is like you're working at, like a DMV type environment. Nobody wants to be there, and you're just, versus level 5 where you're making history and you're changing the world. And so, everybody that's at an Acton wants to be here. That's a choice, especially as they get older, and so that's a big part of it. And then we just set up systems where we know they're far more, this is Laura Sandifer's quote, children are far more capable than we can ever imagine. And we see that every single day. 2 days a week, we don't have a guide in middle school, and they lead discussions. they get into their work. We'll send challenges, we'll post them on this software that Acton has created called Journey Tracker. And yeah, they do their thing. Obviously we have like I'm here, I'm around if somebody gets hurt or needs, to contact outside of the environment. So we have certain things in place for that. But really they just I believe every single human being is born with a purpose, and they want to make like they want to make meaning of their lives. And so they wake up, we all wake up every day, hoping that we can do something meaningful, something productive. And I get to see that through this model every day in children. It's amazing.
It really is amazing. And you're about to have your first graduate out of Launchpad. I wonder if you can share a little bit about his story and the opportunities that he's had through the Acton model.
Um, Man, I wish he was here because he's actually on an apprenticeship right now, and working with a startup company, and he's been putting a lot of hours into that. I want to be respectful of his story and not share, he wouldn't mind. I know we have a great relationship, but I'll just say that um, it's been an incredible journey. He's gone through a lot of challenges. It hasn't been, just, hey, let's just project this image of perfection that we see in society. And it's been cool because he's been at the school for 7 years since since our inception. And then we've seen him go through the thick and thin. Just yesterday, I was talking to one of the launch padders, and it came up how blessed I feel that I get to see them through these journeys through all these years. And not as a teacher's, 1 year and then they're gone. I'm not sure what happened, which is so cool. But he started his own business when he was 14. Um, he's he's got clients all over America, so he gets flown around. He was offered a couple of different jobs through these apprenticeships that he's been doing since middle school, thanks to Acton. And he last summer, I think he was 16, and he got a $78,000 job offer at some company, and then he's like, I want to go to school. I don't really want that right now, so he turned it down. But yeah, you feel really just excited and hopeful with a model like this that supports learners and youth to, find what they're passionate about and work on what we like to call their next great adventure. So post high school, post launchpad, what are they going to be doing that they find resonates with their purpose? Another thing that's really cool about Acton is there's so much thought put into how to prepare you for the real world. So this next great adventure stuff, it's like, what's a deliberate practice that you can hone and have with you no matter where you go, a superpower that you develop, for example. Who are some mentors that you can connect with that can, have a healthy, meaningful relationship and guide you through life. We all need these things, so it's really cool how it's set up.
And why are families attracted to the Acton model? What do you hear from prospective families when they come to you? What are they looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all over. It's all like a whole scale, a whole spectrum. I think most in the kind of maybe what I've seen, this is anecdotal, but I've evaluated hundreds of applications and met with hundreds of families, in the last 7 years. And maybe in the thousands, I don't know. But like generally there's a, a recognition that the public system and conventional education, even in a private school, um, it's just not good enough for your child, and you want them to think independently. You want them to be responsible for their learning. There's so much victimhood in the way the system is set up. If I don't do well, oh well, it's my teacher's fault, right? If I don't, oh well, it's this or that or whatever. And in Acton, we talk about the hero's journey, and it's all about taking responsibility, and it starts there. And we start that at the foundation of Acton is a learner driven environment. The learners are responsible for driving their education. So it's a really beautiful thing. But we've had learners who've come from public schools who are just like, they're bored, it's not working. They're learners who come from Montessori and they're like, we want to continue this, and we just don't see this Montessori type philosophy for the later ages. And so if you are in a Montessori school and you really want that type of environment, I would look at an Acton. I would check it out for sure as they get older. I would never tell anybody who's satisfied and who's happy with what they're doing to apply for an Acton. The struggle is real, and you have to be very convinced. There's a conviction you need that, like, I want this and I'm ready to go through these struggles, because that's what's going to really prepare my learner, my child, and myself for life.
And what do the parents say they see as the biggest transformation or change in their children after attending an Acton?
Man, that's so cool. I've seen it across the board. I get excited for maybe the cheaper victories, which are like a learner who struggles. It's not cheap, it's amazing, but a learner who struggles with reading, and then all of a sudden, without all the pressure and feeling like they're behind and all that, they have, Maria Montessori talks about these sensitive periods, or there's just like this explosion, right? Those are so cool to see from an academic standpoint. But Acton is so much more than just academics. And I think the stuff that always hits me like really hard is like the character stuff. So a couple years ago, a family that was with us from the beginning, they ended up leaving. They were moved, and the distance wouldn't work. And so I remember the learner's mom was in tears as we left, and she said, we do meditation things every day in the morning, and mindfulness practices, and they have peace conversations when they have conflict, and she's like, I'm really just gonna miss the character development that you guys do here. And so she was kind of in tears thinking about that. So my hope is, as a person, right, the mindset of a hero, the mentality that I'm going to be responsible and that I want to help people, and just those kinds of things that really stick with them. I feel like education is at the root of it all. It's cultivating a spirit, an approach to life, that you can tackle things and handle them, and not just back down and give up, and stuff like that. And so I feel like those are the biggest changes that we see. There's other ones, communication, standing up for yourself, and taking responsibility, whether it's academic or social, finding things you're passionate and curious about, putting yourself out there, taking risks. There's so much, but yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that Acton continues to gain momentum now at roughly 300 schools, more and more parents discovering the Acton model and wanting it for their children, and more education entrepreneurs launching Actons all across the country. The website is thehumanistacademy.org. And Vijay Shah, thanks so much for being on the Liberated Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Liberated Podcast. If you liked this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and rate and review us while you're there. For more information about this episode, visit liberatedpodcast.com. And to follow my writing and connect with me, please visit me at the Foundation for Economic Education at fee.org/Kerry.